To me, being a Latina in the United States means that you never quite fit in.
I think I'm actually still in the process of figuring out what it means to be Latina.
I love the tradition, I love the food, I love the laughter.
One thing I hate is when they say that I'm not Dominican because my Spanish is not good or that I was born here.
I'm fluent in Spanglish, but I cannot speak Spanish.
Religion became an important factor. I grew up in parochial schools. I'm proud to say I got kicked out of several.
I grew up listening to Spanish music, just like many other Latinos. Now I'm just greatly into heavy metal.
Señoritas don't even use tampons.
In the Latino society, I have huevos because I have proven myself that I broke those barriers.
My grandfather, World War II veteran, pilot, flew 34 successful missions and was ashamed to his toes about being Mexican. But to me, that was the only culture I wanted to want me. I wanted to be Mexicana. I wanted to say, that's me all over. And I don't care if I'm half, I don't care, you know, and it's who I am, and it's the thing between being Latin and being a woman, those are the two things that I am the most proud of.
Coming to this country was having an adolescent approach me in a store. And I was with my mom. It was actually a bodega in the Bronx, and I don't remember what really took place except that maybe I was in his way or whatever the case was. He told me to move and he called me a nigger. And I didn't know what that term meant because I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, but I knew that whatever it was, it must have been something really bad. And so my experience, that's why I'm saying, you know, what I had mentioned before, what does it mean to be a Latina? Because once again, people have, you know, put you in this box in terms of what you're supposed to be. And this was a Latino kid who said this, an adolescent. He was like, I could tell he was Latino. It was in the hood, and you know, in the 70s in the Bronx. And I even remember what he looked like. And that really, I think, has greatly impacted my experience coming up in this country.
I was born in Zacatecas and was brought to the United States when I was 2. And so I'm basically ni de aquí ni de allá. So I never really identified with either an Anglo culture or a Mexican culture until I came back from college. And at that point, I realized that I wasn't really American and I wasn't really Mexican. I was just me. And so being who I am, I'm just an outgoing girl, trying to make a living, trying to be aggressive. I like to go out. I like to experience. I like to travel. I like to drink. I like to party. I don't have any children. I don't plan on having any children. That is very unconventional. That breaks the norm. Is it a little selfish? Probably, but who isn't selfish, right? I'm quite a bit egocentric like most of us.
I have 3 different worlds because in being a woman, being Latina, and then being lesbian, I have to juggle various worlds. And I'm able to merge that through family and friends in my everyday life as well as in my culture, enjoying the arts and the activities that are not just Latina, but also Latina lesbian. And it's just, you know, wonderful in being Latina to be able to enjoy those things.
When someone tells me I'm not Latina enough, it reminds me of growing up in junior high. being told that all the time because of my light skin, blue eyes. I used to have blonde hair and I didn't speak a lot of Spanish, so I was constantly being told I wasn't Latina enough. So it takes me back all the way back then. And having to defend myself all the time, letting people know I am who I am just because I look different doesn't make me different from who you are. And it still happens now, all the way through college, and sometimes even now that I've already graduated, it still goes on. People talk behind me, talking Spanish, believing that I don't know what they're saying, yet they get a surprise when I respond.
I don't ever think I was ever really that traditional. Part of me is really traditional, but a lot of me is not. I mean, I drove my whole family out of their mind, you know. I mean, I ran away to go to Woodstock, all right? And my parents went out of their mind with that because they were very strict. I was not allowed to go out. And I got the tickets and didn't tell them and left them a note saying, I'm moving out. And I went.
I grew up in a very Catholic religious background, so having sex before marriage is a no-no, you know. We're expected to only wait to have sex until you get married, you know, it's very strict. And I grew up with a mother that never really talked about sex, you know, never really talked about my whole puberty process, never really talked about, you know, contraceptives is not even accepted.
I think that sexuality is really fluid, and I think that navigating that in itself is a challenge for me, you know. And when I was younger, I used to have it in my head, okay, I have to be one thing or another. But I constantly meet people that challenge my sexual perceptions, you know, and ideas of sexuality and things like that. And there have been moments where I'm just like, oh, I'm a bad girl. But then I'm like, oh, that makes me a good girl. You know what I mean? So there are those moments where I'm just like, fuck it, I know better. You know, and my mother's been a good example of someone who's a very sexual person, and I don't consider her a whore. She's had a lot of lovers. She's never brought them home. She's never flaunted them to her kids. But she's been very real about, I'm single, I like sex, and I want sex, and I would hope the same for you guys. And she's been very frank with us in growing up, you know. I remember my first sex was at 16, and it was with an older guy. He was 19 years old. And because I didn't tell her, you know, she wanted me to tell her, and she had to find out like some other way. I think she found my birth controls. I was responsible enough to go get on birth controls. At the time, condoms weren't emphasized. This was a while ago. And she told him, she says, listen, motherfucker, you are her first, but you are not gonna be her last. She ain't staying with you because you ain't good enough for my daughter. So don't think that because you're her first that you own her. And I was like, oh, God, mommy, why? You know, I was so embarrassed. But she really drilled that into me because I was just like, he's my man. We're gonna live together and we're gonna be happy and all this stuff. And she's like, keep dreaming, sweetheart. It's not, men are not like that. My mother had a very cynical view of men. So that helped me not to idealize the whole notion of, you know, roles, you know, and power dynamics. So if anything, my mother would emphasize that because if you're a sexual woman, you know what you're doing, that makes you more powerful. And I really appreciate that to this day.
there are a lot of women in the Latino community that are very, very church-oriented. They're very, you know, modest. Virtue is a big thing. I always thought that in the Latino community, they really wanted you to behave like the Madonna in, you know, the living room and the prostitute in the bedroom kind of stuff, which is like kind of an old cliche, but I think it is. As a younger woman, I used to get really pissed off when people used to say to me, mira, mira, and all that kind of stuff, because they thought Latina women were loose. I might have punched you, you know. I actually have a couple of times in my past decked a couple of guys for that very reason. I have no regrets. I think that's a private thing, though, you know, what your sexuality is. I didn't like when the films portrayed women that way. I didn't like they were prostitutes or easy, that Latina women were easy. I also didn't like the Madonna thing. It was too much for me. You know, my mother and my aunts and stuff, they were all very holier than thou sometimes, and it made me out of my mind. And I grew up like in the 70s, where everybody was running around screwing anything they could see. I didn't, though, because I had my mother in my head, you know.
I have never been a Virgin Mary. I have been a puta here and there in bed and outside of bed. But, you know, I don't know, maybe I am a very lucky Latina that I think that norm was broken by my family. So I'm being very comfortable not to feel pressure with this, you know, being a mujer latina sensual and being a, you know, mujer buena y Virgin Mary type.
There's a lot of sexism. There's a lot of how the women have to negotiate with the men around issues of machismo. How we still have the whole notion of la casa grande, la casa chica, where a married man is entitled to have his second family, and that everyone knows who everyone else is, but the wife by law, the one where he got married in the church or you know, in a civil ceremony, the one who inherits the property, most of the time she has nothing to worry about the second family, because the second family are outside of that financial equation. So when one, anyway, when I think about that, and I think about how having this idea that it's okay for a man to have multiple families, that it's okay for children to be born out of wedlock, and that if the dad decides that he wants to give them money, he will, but he really has no obligation other than his moral or ethical obligation. That to me is the hidden side of our, and in this case our Latino culture, because this happens throughout Latin America. You know, it's not just in Puerto Rico. And when I see that, then I begin to think about how do we educate our young women so that that's not acceptable. You know, so it's not acceptable that you could be second best in anything.
How lucky I am that I get to experience all these things, and being grateful for the fact that my father took that, you know, came over to the States and left his country, he left Mexico and to make his life here. You know, I'm really grateful, and I don't think I've ever told my father thank you, you know, for doing it, because I think life would be really different in Mexico if I had grown up there, and I'd be a totally different person. But to me, being a Latina in the U.S. is a great thing.
Don't tell him I'm having sex, please.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luceros que cuando los abro, perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado, y en las multitudes el hombre que yo amo. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el oído que en todo su ancho graba noche y día, grillos y canarios, martillos, turbinas, ladridos